Hearts of Iron 4 throws a mountain of stats at you. But which ones actually matter? What values should you aim for? And how do they even work? Today we are answering those questions for every single stat a division can have. The division speed, shown when editing your template, represents your base speed. If you want to see the real speed of your division, you need to click on an existing unit stat. Your base speed will always be bottlenecked to the speed of the lowest battalion. It is afterwards modified by things like air, doctrines, and advisors. Try to ensure your tanks are at least 6 km/h fast in case you will fight under red air. The HP or hit points of your division is entirely based on the sum of the HP of your division's battalions and by how much of a division's manpower requirements you fulfill. That means that if you fulfill 100% of a division's manpower requirements, you add the full HP value, shown in the template editing screen, regardless of how much equipment you have. If a division has more HP, then it takes less losses from combat as opposed to the same division with less HP. HP is the most important reason as to why your tanks and special forces should be high with, since it enables you to sustain higher losses and force attack more frequently. Your tanks also don't come with any HP on their own, so you need to give them some high HP battalions like mechanized to make up for that. Organization represents your unit's ability to keep fighting in battle. Once it hits 0, the combat will end. Unlike HP, organization is calculated by taking the average organization of all divisions in your unit, which means that going for lower combat width units will usually mean that you can field more organization into one tile, enabling you to keep combat up for longer. Both HP and organization are reduced by enemy attack points during combat, more on that later. A division's recovery rate is the speed at which a unit's organization recovers. This is also influenced by a bunch of other modifiers, like what organization value you're currently at, your supply, or your advisors. You can see the real rate at which your units recover orc by hovering over the organization bar of any specific unit. Reconnaissance gives your general a higher reconnaissance value in combat. If your general has a higher reconnaissance value than the enemy general, you get a better chance of countering the enemy's tactic, which means that the enemy tactic loses all of its effects. To be honest, this value isn't quite all that important in the vast majority of scenarios, so I wouldn't bother too much with it when considering what I want to put in my divisions. Suppression is only relevant if you use a template as a garrison template. Contrary to popular belief, a unit with higher suppression does not lower the resistance more than one with lower suppression. The only thing that changes is the IC and manpower needed for garrisons. Usually you'll be just fine with just having a 2 with cavalry as your garrison unit, although if you want to add MP, it's wise to make your unit larger. Weight determines how much convoys you need to transport a unit. It is calculated by taking the sum of the weight of all battalions within a division. Supply use is quite self-explanatory, it's just the supply your unit uses. It is the sum of all battalions, with certain battalions taking up significantly more supply than others. To combat supply problems, consider adding logistic companies and upgrading railways. Reliability makes your equipment less likely to crash down. Reliability works on an equipment basis, so there's hardly any way of combating low reliability other than on your tanks. Adding a maintenance company gives you a reliability bonus, which applies on the reliability you already have, meaning that if your reliability is high to begin with, maintenance boosts it even higher, while low reliability doesn't profit much from it at all, making it one of the worst support companies in the game. Trickleback is the amount of manpower you regain after it's lost in combat. This, in itself, is not that great and important of a stat, since the only way to increase it is by adding field hospitals, which are very expensive for countries that typically struggle with manpower. Field hospitals are great regardless though because of a reduced experience loss and gained HP. Experience loss makes your division retain more of its level when losing manpower to combat, which is huge. This can be incredibly overpowered on certain fronts like Barb, enabling you to farm veterans, because the combat is already going well in your favor to having green air. And then with you losing less experienced soldiers, it gets even better. And because in multiplayer, you can't just have Germany running around with a bunch of plus 75% stat units, Field Hospital 2s are typically banned in MP. Soft attack is the number of attacks your unit can make against an enemy unit. It gets scaled down by the enemy hardness, which you can see at the bar in the bottom of the template. If you have 100 soft attack and the enemy has 10% hardness, and therefore 90% softness, your division can use 90 of its 100 attacks, or 100 soft attacks. Hard attack works in exactly the same way, just the other way around. If you have 100 hard attack and your enemy has 10% hardness, your hard attack gets scaled down to effectively 10. Every attack offers you a certain amount of dice rolls, 4 organization dice rolls and 2 strength dice rolls, the result of which determines whether or not your enemy loses organization and HP. More on that once we get to defense and breakthrough. In multiplayer, hard attack takes priority over soft attack, since enemy tanks will have high hardness values. In single player, it's the other way around, with soft attack being vastly more important than hard attack. Air attack determines a division's capability to properly function under red air. First of all, air attack reduces enemy cast damage by a maximum of 75% at only 10-point air attack, which not only sounds but actually is incredibly low, since virtually anything that grants air attack, including support AA1, gives more than that. Air attack also reduces the breakthrough and speed penalties inflicted by having red air. And lastly, it also shoots down enemy planes. There's no hard cap on how many planes you can shoot down with AA, which enables you to create some funny AA farming divisions, which are typically banned in multiplayer though. To shoot down enemy casts, your division also has to be in combat, is important to remember, even if it's just in the reserve. Remember how I earlier said that every attack point grants organization and strength dice rolls? The chance of that die roll to actually hit is determined by the enemy's defense. Every defense point you have allows you to lower the chance of one enemy attack point hitting your division from 40 to 10%. Every attack point you have more than the enemy has defense is called a crit, as it is on average 4 times more likely to inflict damage. The implications of this are that attack gets increasingly better, as any attack point beyond the enemy's defense is 4 times more valuable as the attack points before. It also means that any defense point above the enemy's attack is just void and does nothing. Breakthrough is just your defense on the offense. Otherwise, it works exactly the same way. Breakthrough is significantly harder to get though, which is one of the main reasons for GBP to be meta for virtually every offensive country. On your tanks, I would generally aim for at least 800 breakthrough, and for your special forces, just aim as high as possible, you won't get enough anyhow. Before moving on, another quick fun fact about breakthrough and defense: if you click a tile, or you get clicked on a tile, the divisions that initially start out in the combat are the ones with the highest defense and breakthrough. Meaning that if you, for example, put a mech division into a tile and an enemy clicks that tile, in almost all cases, the mech will be the first unit to be active in combat, since it has so high defense. Remember how I said that you have 4 organization dice rolls for each attack? That was not entirely true. If you have more armor than your enemy has piercing, the amount of organization dice rolls you have increases by 50% from 4 to 6, essentially granting 50% more damage. But that's not it. Armor also lowers the amount of damage the enemy deals to you, depending on how much they pierce you. That is called partial piercing. If your enemy piercing is higher than your armor, they don't take any penalty, but neither do you. If it is 75% of your armor, they deal 20% less damage. If it is above 50% of your armor, they deal 35% less damage, and if it is less than 50%, they deal 50% less damage. With both of these effects combined, you can hopefully see that piercing the enemy is of absolute priority. But to understand how to properly abuse this, we also need to take a look at how these values are each calculated. Your division's armor and piercing is determined to 40% by the battalion with the highest armor or piercing in the division, and by 60% from the division's average. What this means is that in your tank division design, you typically want at least 1 battalion with high piercing, typically anti-tank, and for your tanks, at least 1 battalion with extremely high armor, which is often called your armor meme. Initiative speeds up planning gain, increases your reinforce rate, and also multiplies your coordination. Where the extra planning speed is rather intuitive, the other two are less so. 1% more initiative increases your reinforce rate by 0.25%. Reinforce rate is what determines how likely your units are to join combat. Whenever you stack 20 divisions on one tile against AI Poland, but seemingly still get clicked extremely easily, reinforce rate is the issue. If all of your divisions get kicked out of combat before the next one reinforced, despite you still having troops on the tile, then you got what is typically referred to as memed out of the tile, and high reinforce rate preempts this. Coordination is a whole lot more complicated than this, but basically your divisions have attacks, right? But turns out they don't actually just attack one unit, but they target certain units. Long story short, 65% of your unit's attacks usually just split equally among the enemy divisions, but 35% of them just target the divisions with the lowest organization. The share of coordinated attacks can be increased by the formula 35% plus coordination times 1 plus initiative, meaning that high initiative enables you to have more coordinated attacks. Why is this good, you may ask? For one, if an enemy division gets kicked out of combat, it can't deal damage to your units anymore. But also, and more importantly, if you concentrate more attacks on one unit, you are more likely to get more attacks on the enemy when he has defenses, making it more likely for you to crit the enemy. You get initiative mainly through signal companies, and while it is nice for defensive infantry and perhaps even tanks, depending on your needs, in most cases it's not that important to have. Entrenchment represents your unit's ability to gain extra stats by sitting around and doing nothing. Entrenchment builds up when you just sit and don't move out of a tile. Once you attack or make any moves, it resets to 0. The main way to get it into your template is through engineers, and maxing out your entrenchment is very important in certain situations, especially when making coast guards like D-Day mech. You can capture a portion of the enemy's equipment by using the game's most useless support company, maintenance companies. You only capture equipment if you win a battle, and the amount you capture is scaled both by your equipment capture rate and by the amount of manpower in your unit, with units with higher manpower being able to capture more equipment of your enemy. This, by the way, also works for enemy CAS lost in battles against you, but overall this is not very useful in the vast majority of cases, and I just recommend not adding maintenance company to your unit. Combat width represents how much space your division takes in combat. Each tile has a certain combat width determined by its terrain and by how many sides the tile is attacked from. You can go slightly over width, which will induce a penalty on your divisions. This can be worth it though if the percentage of stats gained by adding one more battalion outweighs the percentage of stats lost due to the penalty. Battalions usually add either 1, 2 or 3 combat width, with the exception of support companies, which add no combat width at all. As a rule of thumb for your division designs, almost all battalions that add 3 combat width are garbage and should be avoided. In vanilla, defensive infantry should typically be 16 width, while most of your offensive divisions should be either 35 or 36 width, and on mountains you should stay below 33 width.